Hello, this is Joshua for Frost Dragon Designs, and today I'd like to talk to you about my Library Science Cat Heart Enamel pin. This pin is part of my More Cats Doing Science collection. The More Cats Doing Science pin collection features more than 35 designs of cats doing science and science-adjacent activities. Now let's get into the design. The Library Science Cat was one of those ones that was requested a lot when I was initially forming my list of what science cats I was going to do. And my first initial gut reaction upon reading it the first time was, well, that's not really science. And then I was like, well, no. Because let's think about, what is science? So kind of the common definition that I've seen is that science is the systematic study of structures or behaviors of the physical or natural world. So from that standpoint, library science is not a science. But if we just take the core concept of a systematic study, okay, so we're good there. It is a systematic study. It's a systematic study of, how are we organizing books and other resources of knowledge. Now, interestingly, though, a secondary definition that is now considered archaic of science is basically any type of knowledge. It could be used for literally any type of knowledge. If you had a good understanding of something, you could say that you understood the science of it. And I kind of like that definition. It kind of fits. I like a lot of words that are archaic. I used to actually have conversations with people, and I would use some word that they had not heard before, and they were like, that's not a word, or I don't know what that means, and we'd look it up. And 9 times out of 10, when it was one of those words that I used that other people didn't know or weren't aware of, 9 times out of 10, the dictionary would denote it as archaic. So I don't know what century I got my vocabulary from, but clearly it's a little out of date at times. But anyway, once I accepted library science as fitting into the mold of science for the purposes of science cats, then I really got into it because I love parallel lines, and books on a shelf offer a great opportunity for parallel lines, but not just any parallel lines. They're parallel lines in perspective, which is so much fun to do. It's time consuming, but it's almost like Zen in the systematic way that you have to go about it in order for it to look correct. Even if you're not good at drawing or drafting, if you don't know the rules of perspective or things of that nature, that doesn't matter because your brain has experienced perspective its entire life. And that's why things that are not done in proper perspective often look wrong, even if you can't articulate why it looks wrong. You just know that it does look wrong because, compared to your lifetime of seeing things in 3D, it does not match. And that's what makes perspective illustrations so challenging, is that everybody's basically got a mental database of how it should look. Now, fun shout outs for this, the 020 that's on the front of that bookcase, that is the Dewey Decimal System for library science. I also got some feedback on this one from some actual librarians. Originally, I wanted that bottom shelf to also be stuffed full of books, but they all told me the same thing, is that they don't really use the bottom shelf. It's there for, organizational purposes, so they have a place to temporarily put things while they're moving things around, or overflow space. It's basically there so that the bookshelves are not constantly stuffed when they're needing to move things around. That's their working space functionally. So I just tossed some of those bookends down at the bottom there, and that filled the space visually very nicely while leaving it, kind of true to its purpose, at least what those librarians told me they use it for. Other fun details for this pin, I got to include the library cart. I thought that was really fun and interesting. I always see library carts because librarians are always working. They're always putting things back on the shelves. They're putting new things on the shelves. They're taking old things off of the shelves. They're having to make the selections as far as what to keep in the collection, what to move out of the collection. Also got to include that library stool. We've all seen them. Like you go to a library and that's the type of step stool that they have. I don't know what they're called. I'm sure they have a specific word. I got some reference images just by Googling library stepping stool, and there were tons of pictures of it. So apparently it's fairly ubiquitous. And then, another big design aspect for this pin that was a struggle for me at first is the attire. What the kitty librarian is wearing. And, it never really made sense that they would be wearing a lab coat. I mean, because they're not in a laboratory setting, right? I mean, in pop culture, a lab coat really has become kind of a synonymous with scientist, but not all scientists wear lab coats. I mean, the whole point of a lab coat is to protect you from, splashing or spraying or things of that nature, so that you don't get injured by chemicals or small particles or something of that nature, so you don't mess up, your clothing even. That's not going to happen in a library. And by the way, I think none of my kitties actually have their lab coats buttoned, so it's not really going to be serving its actual purpose. Shame on you, kitties, button your lab coats. But it just didn't fit with library science. So this was another one of those, I asked around and I was like, hey, I know there's not like a librarian uniform, but, what do you think? And almost all of them were like, it's always cold in the library. It's temperature controlled because you want to make sure it's temperature and environmental control, humidity and all that, because you want to make sure that the books aren't going to deteriorate. And so libraries are often cold places, it seems. So a lot of the librarians were like, well, I wear a sweater. And I was like, okay, you know what? Let's do that. The kitty's going to wear a little sweater. And then, because I hadn't already broken enough of my Science Cat visual concept rules, the big book, all of the science kitties, almost all of them are standing on a big book. They all have a big book. And this one, it just felt really disrespectful for the kitty to be standing on a book. They're a librarian. They should not be standing on a book. So what I ended up doing was, I have the big book in front of the bookshelves, and it's being held up by a giant bookend. Overall, I just really feel like this design came together well, despite it having so many things that are different from the other Science Cats. I really do love this design, and I hope you do too. So if you've enjoyed watching me design this pin, hearing me talk about some of my thoughts, please go ahead, like, and subscribe. I try to release 1 to 2 new videos a week, and I would love to have you along for the next one. So thank you again so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day.